All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. My name is Anna Santamaria. I use she, her pronouns. I am Family Equality's Associate Director of Archives, Storytelling, and Brand. And that's a big fancy way of saying that I am facilitating tonight's discussion. Tonight, we're talking about baby making for everybody, family building, and fertility for LGBTQ plus and solo parents. This book is an inclusive, straightforward guide to fertility. You've heard about what to expect when you're expecting. This is that, but for families that are outside of that heterosexual nuclear family model. In Baby Making for Everybody, queer millennial midwives Ray Rocklin and Marea Goodman, who we are with tonight, use their professional expertise to demystify the dizzying process of pursuing parenthood as queer and solo people, offering detailed, gender-affirming, body-positive advice in a much-needed, compassionate, step-by-step guide for every aspect of the complicated, messy, and glorious process of building a family. They combine practical information with personal narratives and first person community wisdom, really giving prospective parents the information they need to grow their families. And as I hinted at, we are joined by one of the co authors tonight, Marea Goodman. Marea is a licensed midwife who specializes in supporting the LGBTQ plus community through conception, pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. They are the co-author of the book Baby Making for Everybody. They are also the founder of PregnantTogether, which is a virtual community supporting queer folks and solo parents from preconception all the way through parenting. Marea is deeply passionate about empowering people with the information they need to grow their families, something that we have in common with Marea over here at Family Equality, and fighting against the isolation endemic in our culture. Their work has been featured in Cosmopolitan, Vogue, Autostraddle, USA Today, Huffington Post, parentaldata.org, and others. And they say what they are most proud of is getting to be a parent for their awesome kids, which I'm sure we'll dive more into today as well. So, welcome, Marea. Welcome to all our attendees. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Anna. And yeah, wonderful to be here. I truly love hanging out with people and talking about family building. And so I'm really glad you're here. I really want this to be useful to you. So feel free to raise your hand, or I don't know if people can unmute themselves or we unmute them, or put things in the chat. And we'll go from there. So this book, Baby Making for Everybody, came out in April 2023. And I will share, and we have a small intimate group. I will share that that is also the time that my partner and I decided that we needed to split up. And it was a very complicated time in my personal life and an ironic time to have a book about queer family building come out into the world. And I share that because um, one one thing that I do in Pregnant Together, which is the virtual community that I run, is, we work with people. We have hundreds of members across the world, and sometimes family building happens as hoped for and planned. And usually there are some roadblocks that happen. And I feel, me personally, I was really lucky to get pregnant pretty easily. I gave birth to my youngest, who's now 4.5, in January 2021. And had a blended family with my co-parent as well. And I feel that my personal experience of the family that we planned for changing shape, moving into co-parenting, it really gave me an image of oh, queer family building and solo parent family building. It isn't all rainbows and butterflies, and it's really important to present all of the ranges of experiences so that we don't feel alone with it. And so it's a topic that I approach with a lot of complexity and holding space for all of the nuances, which I think is a good segue for starting to read from the first chapter, which is so Ray and I, who's another queer midwife and a dear friend of mine, we met on Instagram actually and decided to write this book together before ever meeting in person. And they've become a dear friend and colleague. We started the book with a chapter called "Why Do You Want to Be a Parent Anyway?" And we really wanted to start with supporting people to get clear on values and priorities and internal clarity because there's so many logistics that we can lose sight of. And so I'll just read the first two paragraphs of this chapter. We found through both our midwifery practices and our own experiences that during the process of growing a family as LGBTQ plus or solo people, folks can sometimes get bogged down in the details of the how and lose touch with the why. This makes sense to us. After all, the how can be overwhelming with many steps, new decisions, and costs to consider. One minute, you're imagining holding your future child in your arms, and the next, you're doom scrolling through donor profiles, peeing on sticks, crunching the numbers again to see if you can eke out another round of IUI, or wondering how in the hell you can afford IVF. Add in the emotions, and it's no wonder so many of us lose sight of the forest for the trees. We know it can be stressful. We've counseled hundreds of people through this process, and we've been there ourselves. That's why we want to start this book by supporting you to get in touch with your deep desires, hopes, dreams, and intentions around parenting before you embark on the logistics of actually making that happen. By starting this way, we hope you can feel resourced and supported, and that you can carry these feelings with you throughout your family building journey. Um, it's it's an often dizzying path, and one thing that I remind my clients and the members of the community is like, as much as possible, returning to those values and priorities, whether it's your conception process, choosing your donor. We have a whole chapter on how to choose a donor and different practices that will help you get clear on values and priorities in that process. Um, and and also part of what was so important to us when making this book was including a bunch of different family stories, and we included, there were like 30 different people that contributed little blurbs to different sections of the book, and that's one of my favorite parts about it, is these testimonials and these really intimate stories from folks that share their own experiences. And I think one thing that we felt as queer midwives who were like quote unquote experts in family building during our own conception journey is that it's really isolating, and it's so easy to feel like you're the only person in the world who is going through this. So that was like the spirit behind including these community stories, and also why I started this virtual community was to help us find each other and support each other through this journey. And even just knowing, oh, there are 40 other people that are like going through this same decision point of, should I switch from IUI to IVF, and how do I do that? And knowing that you're not alone. It sounds cheesy, but it is very true. It does really make a difference. There's so many things that I could talk about. We can dive into fertility support. We can dive into choosing a donor. Um, I will say, and I think we're just going to bop around and go non-chronologically because there's so many things that we can talk about in this book. But I think the next section that I want to read is from chapter 8, which is on miscarriage and infertility when things don't go as planned. Um, and the reason I want to go here next is there's just not a lot of spaces where people talk about the unique um, forms, about the unique flavor of queer and solo parent infertility. So I'm going to read the beginning of this. And yes, Rebecca, thank you. Finding a provider who supports queer family building. We have a whole section on this, and I would love to read. I also have a free download on my website that I'll share with you. Um, okay, so we say in this chapter, most people don't pick up a book on family building and fertility, imagining that miscarriage and infertility will be part of their own stories. But we'd be lying if we didn't acknowledge that things don't always go as planned. Some people get and stay pregnant relatively quickly, but others do not. Sometimes you, your partner, or your surrogate miscarries. Other times, months of inseminations and negative pregnancy tests pile up. 10 to 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage, and it's estimated that 1 in 8 people will experience fertility problems, a ratio that only seems to be increasing in modern times. Miscarriage and infertility are incredibly common experiences of childbearing people. It's a frequent grief, one that our culture is scared to talk about, which often leaves people experiencing infertility and miscarriage feeling very isolated. For LGBTQ plus and solo people, this isolation can be even greater. We don't see ourselves represented in literature and discussions about infertility and loss, and the few resources available are geared toward families that don't look like ours. Additionally, the majority of pregnancies in our communities come with so much intentionality and hard work. The grief of an imagined future can be devastating. Hand in hand with that, of course, is the sense of scarcity when you lack easy access to gametes or financial resources, or you don't have the emotional support of a partner. Stress and concerns come with the constant decision making and the time spent weighing pros and cons about future family building. Our community's burden in fertility struggles is often greater and unseen. Really, yeah, just highlighting the importance of community and how it's there are all these ways that our culture and society talk about family building that so often leaves queer folks and solo parents out of the picture. And yeah, supporting folks through, really getting the real information that is relevant to them because, um, queer or solo parent infertility is different than heterosexual infertility, and fertility clinics are formed around supporting heterosexual people who have confirmed infertility. Being having social infertility, which is a term that I dislike, is a different thing. But some of us will also have medical infertility, and so yeah, supporting people to really be able to navigate through that can be really complex. Let's go to finding a supportive provider because it's such a great question. Let's see. I am going to just read out the questions that we created for you all to find an affirming provider. Just some sample questions, and then I can send towards the end. I have a link on the website that fleshes this out a little bit more. Um, and I know certain people have easier access to affirming providers than others. It's very geography specific. One of the main things that we do we do so many things in Pregnant Together, like support groups and resources, but we do a lot of referrals. Like, does anyone know a fertility clinic in Raleigh that, works well with queer folks and solo parents? And there are Facebook groups and Reddit, and having a recent referral can be really helpful. But here are some sample questions that you can ask a potential provider when you're considering working with them, either during trying to conceive or your pregnancy. How many LGBTQ plus people have you cared for in your practice? What percentage of your practice is currently LGBTQ plus or solo? How does your care differ when working with solo parents or LGBTQ plus people, and how is it the same? I think this is really an important question, especially during the trying to conceive phase, because depending on your fertility picture and your age, you may be best served by the medications and ultrasounds and monitoring that they offer to the medically infertile heterosexual people, or you may be best served by a different approach that doesn't involve medications, because there's research that shows at a certain age, and there's certain criteria that the medications don't actually increase your chance of getting pregnant, but they do increase your risk of having multiples. So I think it's important to distinguish and to see if providers are up on that research or not, because it's not commonly taught to fertility providers. Are your intake forms and handouts inclusive of solo parents and LGBTQ plus people? This one is really important. Have your front desk staff, nurses, and other people participating in my care receive training in affirming language and working with solo parents or LGBTQ plus people? There are situations where there's an awesome queer affirming provider, and then the front desk staff or the medical assistants don't have the same training, and that can be extra challenging. And then, have you participated in continuing education around caring for LGBTQ families? What is your practice's experience with insurance billing and advocacy for solo parents or LGBTQ plus people, since we often do not meet infertility criteria? And does your billing department provide advocacy or accommodations and assistance due to discrimination against solo parents and LGBTQ people? So those are some examples. You can email folks this. So I'm trained originally as a home birth midwife. I'm not doing home birth right now, but the spirit of home birth midwifery is all about like autonomy and patient choice and a non-hierarchical model of medical care. And so I always like to remind people, your healthcare provider works for you. You are hiring them, and it's really important that you, as much as is possible, given the constraints of geography and finances and insurance, find someone that you actually trust. Um, does anyone have any other requests of topics that I can read? If not, I've got just a few community sourced blurbs that I would like to share. But if you have any requests, put them in the chat. Would love to make sure that I'm talking about things that are relevant to the people that are here. So this is a little quote from someone who induced lactation, a non-gestational parent with breasts who induced lactation. Um, and she says, as a non-gestational parent, I induced lactation and co-nursed with my partner for 13 months. I'm now continuing to body feed our toddler, and my partner has weaned. The journey has been full of sweetness, changes, and challenges and pumping. Open communication with my partner and allowing room for conflicting feelings have been necessary to make it through the more difficult times. I am also grateful to have worked with an IBCLC who was very experienced with inducing lactation and relactation. While I never made a full supply for our baby as an infant, I am a full contributor to our child's nutrition, well-being, and comfort. Inducing lactation is both mundane and miraculous, and it reminds me of the queer expansiveness of the body. My child likes to zerbert at my chest and laugh to themselves about it. Who knew chest feeding could be so wonderful and weird? We talk a lot about the experience of non-gestational parents in Pregnant Together. And another important thing when thinking about finding an affirming provider, if you are partnered, making sure that the non-gestational parent also feels like a central part of the process, because it, for people who are coupled and if both partners are AFAB, it's not uncommon, growing your family with a sperm donor, it's not uncommon for the non-gestational parent to feel left out of the process in some capacity. And definitely something that we talk about a lot. We have a non-gestational parent support group in Pregnant Together, and wanting to support folks through that unique experience of becoming a parent, which is different depending on if it's happening in your body or not. Um, we have a section, chapter 5 is trans people have babies too. And we collected all of the most current research that we have. We talked about people who make sperm and people who make eggs and the different process to making those choices as a trans person. I really love this contribution from a trans mother who shared pregnancy is seen as a magical process of creation and is often seen as the mystical power women possess. Trans women are often left feeling excluded from this mystical womanhood because of our inability to carry a child and the difficulties we face helping to create one. I mourn for not being able to carry my child myself, but that doesn't make them any less mine. That doesn't make being their mother any less magical. The true magic is not in the biological process of creating the baby, but is instead in the intense love and effort that goes into caring for a baby and child. My child knows who I am more than I do myself at some points. I'm their mom. Really, really, really sweet contribution. All right, I'm gonna switch gears. I know we've got some Q&A to get into. I imagine, and I know it's on our agenda to talk a little bit about fertility tracking. And so this in chapter 4 is timing is everything, how to figure out your fertility. And this is from Ray, my co-author. So we both wrote the book. There were some sections where we like took off our midwifery hats and shared more about the personal experience. So this is what Ray said about fertility tracking. Words cannot express how much I dislike cycle tracking. I began tracking my cycle in February 2020, thinking my partner and I would start inseminating that summer. Ha! And when the pandemic hit, I took a break and restarted tracking in July to start trying to conceive later that year. My cycle is affected by stress and sleep loss, which makes sense and is an occupational hazard of midwifery. But when you're trying to figure out when you're ovulating, it is also maddening. I had months when, just as I was about to ovulate, I'd go to a birth and lose sleep, so my ovulation would be delayed 5 to 10 days. One month, I peed on LH strips for 12 days before I got a positive surge. My temperature data was inconsistent, mostly due to sleep loss. I decided to try a fancy thermometer that auto synced with an app, and the weird gender stuff on the app made me feel like an alien. My unclear cover line made me feel like a failure. I loved interpreting temperature on other people's charts, but for my own chart, it was wildly useless. I needed a friend to tell me to stop taking my temperature before I was willing to throw in the towel. I was determined to do everything right. I took every supplement, started fertility acupuncture, did LH strips 3 times a day, and checked my cervix and cervical fluid 2 or 3 times a day. Unsurprisingly, I burned out quickly, stopped going to acupuncture, and when we had sperm bank delays, aka sperm jail, I tailspinned about having to be so attentive to my body and not drink 8 cups of coffee a day forever. More than once, I took a month off from trying just to smoke a cigarette and not feel like I was ruining everything. Fertility can be a maddening process, and I became obsessed with the most exact timing. The truth is, tracking for longer periods of time does give you more data. And by 7 months of good tracking, I was able to determine that I ovulate closer to 18 hours after my LH surge. The first time I timed my IUI with a shorter timing interval, I got pregnant. That pregnancy didn't stick, but within 2 months of my miscarriage, I felt like I understood my cycle again. I also deeply resented having to continue tracking. But when I considered the alternative, ultrasounds, blood work, medication, none of which I had insurance coverage for and also didn't guarantee any different outcomes, tracking continued to make the most sense. It's a journey. And I just think having spaces where you can speak honestly about it and get some of that emotional support through it is really important.
And I welcome that being this space for the folks who
Yes.
are here. Like I said, if you have something to say, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. I don't think you'll be seen on the screen, so do not worry if you are like in the depths of your living room couch. But that way we can have a little bit more connection. I really loved those passages, the stories from the people who have actually experienced. the things that you're talking about were really great ways to not only illustrate like the whole community that we have who are forming families, but all the different ways that someone can approach this journey, which I'm sure when you set out to write this book might have been a little bit of like a head spinning thing. Like, how do we possibly encapsulate every single thing that we can? So the stories are a really beautiful way of doing that, and just seeing all the ways that people interpret this period of their lives. I see we have a question. I figured that the cycle tracking would be kicking off a bunch of questions. Our first question is, how anal about the very first thing temp taking do we need to be? Asking as a cat mom with an ever-changing alarm. LOL.
That's a great question. I will share. I tried doing my temperature, and I had a 2-year-old at the time and was on call as a midwife. And I also have a brain that doesn't attend to minute details well. And it didn't work for me. And I work with a lot of people that when we weigh the mental and emotional stress that is often involved in basal body temperature and the information that we get, it doesn't always come out as a clean and clear, yes, you should take your temperature. So I would say it depends on other fertile signs, if how clear other fertile signs are, how regular your cycle is, and then how often you're being woken up. Like if you are waking up in the middle of the night, or there's a huge variation, like sometimes you wake up at 4 a.m. and sometimes you wake up at 9 a.m., you may not have the stability in your lifestyle to get accurate basal body temperature readings, and that is okay. Like it is one piece of useful information, and in the book we outline, and I know that you read the book, but like there are, I would say, four main strategies for tracking: the LH strips, basal body temperature, looking at your cervical fluid, and then including other signs. Some people have what's called middle schmerz, which is when you feel cramping in your ovaries. There are some other signs that you can use. So I will say many people start out trying to take their temperature and then it doesn't work. It is a very specific thing. So, yes, they do recommend the very first thing before you drink water or get up to pee. That's when your basal body temperature is going to be the most accurate because it's your body temperature at full rest. Um, if you are the kind of person that really likes a lot of data and information, even if you do have, some mornings you wake up at 5 a.m. and sometimes you sleep in until 10, I would, if you like doing it, I would encourage you to do it and just kind of take that data with a grain of salt, and write down when you're waking up. It can be helpful, especially during that window. So when you get your LH surge, those next 2 days, really, those next 48 hours, the day of your LH surge and those next 48 hours are going to give you the most information for timing. Um, if you lie there semi awake for a few minutes, you will still get a probably accurate reading. Yes. Great clarifying question. You're so welcome. Yes, and there is on our website, babymakingforeverybody.com, and on pregnanttogether.com, there's a downloadable free fertility tracking chart. I'm trying to see where our example is. We created a much prettier version of this, for people to download, and it has some more information. It's all gender neutral, and so it has an area for basal body temperature and other fertile signs, and some cute photos on it too. So you can download that, and print it out. For my brain, the printable chart is so much easier than the apps. I just find that, yes, so much easier. We had a comment or question. So I often wake up in the night, but I just take my temp when I wake up in the middle and again when I wake up later. It's not precise, but I can see general trends throughout my cycle and I use the paper chart. Yeah, this is the purpose of basal body tracking is to get a sense of your body's patterns. And so, especially when you're inseminating with donor sperm that's been previously frozen. So, we know that when it's been processed and frozen and then defrosted, sperm lives for about 12 to 24 hours in the body. Um, so, the reason we really encourage basal body tracking is that it helps give a clearer window into when our body actually releases the egg. And so when we know when our body actually releases the egg and then when we get our LH strip, on average, we assume it's 24 hours, but as Ray said, for them, it's 18 hours. I've done IUIs for people that had a 72-hour window. So getting as much information as possible, either through looking at your cervix or taking your basal body temperature, even when it's not exactly perfect and precise, the information will be helpful. And that is something that I support members through. And I also do consults with people if you need some support in kind of piecing together all of your information. Love the comments. While we're on this topic, I will read our little section on defrosting donor sperm, which just tickles me. Hold on, I marked it earlier. Where is it? Um, no, I might not find it. Let's see. Okay, so someone asked if the membership applies to households or if it's per individual. And yes, whenever people, if you have a partner or multiple partners, they get free links once you join. So feel free to join. You can also email me. Yes, I do a lot of like one-on-one coaching there. Um, I can't find it now. Let's see. Oh well. Ah, I did. Okay. So I'm going to talk about thawing a frozen sperm sample. Frozen sperm comes in an obscenely large tank that looks like a rocket ship. Leave it inside its rocket ship in your house until it is time for your insemination. When it's time, cut the plastic zip tie securing the lid and then carefully pull the lid off. Using a towel or a pot holder, pull the metal hook that's hanging on the edge of the lid up and out, and that will be attached to the tube holding your sperm. It will be very cold and very tiny. You will have a moment of how the hell is this tiny thing so much money? Very carefully remove the sperm from the holder with a towel or pot holder. If you touch the liquid nitrogen with your bare skin, it will burn you. You can then defrost the sample one of two ways. Swirl the tube in a cup of room temperature water, not hot. The water should feel about body temperature. Test it on your wrist to be sure. Keep the vial submerged until it's liquid. Put the sperm vial on the counter for 10 to 15 minutes, or you can defrost it under your underarm. Once the sperm is defrosted, some people will put the container in an armpit for 3 to 5 minutes to warm the sperm up to body temperature, and some people won't. Both techniques have been studied and are okay. Yeah, so we try as much as possible to make the process as real and unclinical as possible. But we also, and there are sections that we dive into how IVF works and the decisions around growing your family. That's often when I do these talks, things that people have questions about of like, how do you make that decision of which method to use and when to change methods? And I saw your question. I will get to it right after I read this community community story, which kind of speaks to that question of like, how do you make a decision of how to do this? So this person shared, we want 3 kids. At least we think we do. I'm currently pregnant with baby number 2 and have an almost 2-year-old at home. Whether we choose to have 3 kids or stick with 2, knowing that we wanted to have more than one kid play an important role in how we decided to build our family. My wife had a hysterectomy due to fibroids, so we knew that I would be the one carrying the babes. I was 36 years old at the time and had been working in reproductive health, fertility services, and birth work for 15 years. Bottom line, I had seen the full fertility life cycle for many families. I knew that doing inseminations was less expensive, more intimate, and physically easier than IVF. I had also seen clients and friends go through multiple insemination cycles before they had success. Sometimes they needed to switch from inseminations to IVF, thus bearing the brunt of both costs. I felt afraid of feeling the disappointment associated with unsuccessful IUI cycles. We crunched the numbers. We averaged that it would take 6 insemination attempts for each pregnancy, times 3 pregnancies, with the understanding that it may get more difficult as I started to near 40. We were also banking on the hope that one IVF cycle would yield more than one viable embryo. We came up with a figure that was pretty comparable between 18 IUIs and one IVF cycle. So we decided to just forego inseminations entirely. None of the IVF services were covered by insurance. We were able to get some labs and an ultrasound with Kaiser, but everything else, including purchasing and shipping donor sperm, was paid for from our savings. It was a bit of a gamble. Thankfully for us, it worked out as planned. I think that's something that we don't talk about a ton, and something I am seeing shift in our communities because it is more common. There was a change in the medical diagnosis of infertility, which now includes relationship status, which is important because it gives queer folks and solo parents increased access to insurance coverage for different fertility treatments. And so I am seeing, because of that, more people going straight to IVF, or wanting to grow their families through reciprocal IVF. And so I do think it's useful to, really think about it. And something that I've talked to my midwifery clients about for so long is, my job is really to present all of the information that I have to you, and then you make the best decision that you can for your family. We can only make the decision that's right in front of us. We can't make the decision that's 5 months down the road or 5 months ago. Like, we just have to do our best to make whatever decision makes the most sense as we go along this process. We got a question. I've heard of others using soft discs or menstrual cups or other items to keep the sperm inside for longer periods of time. Does this actually help? Great question. We have some research on this, and it's actually, I would say, more of a complex answer. I think for people doing inseminations at home, especially with fresh sperm, so with a known donor, um, there was a study done multiple decades ago with heterosexual people, where they used a soft disc after intercourse and the chance of pregnancy slightly increased. And it's like a low cost, easy thing to do. So often for people doing at home inseminations, so putting the sperm by the cervix, but not an IUI, which is when the sperm goes inside the uterus. Um, I think it's not a bad idea. It might help, especially if you have a busy day and you can't just like spend an hour with your hips up in the air, because the mechanics of the way the menstrual cup works or the cervical cap is, it will help keep the seminal fluid and the sperm closer to your cervix and help it get where it needs to go. I don't think if you're doing IUI, that it's necessary, because with IUI, we process the seminal fluid to separate the sperm from all the other materials that are in semen and then put it directly into the uterus. And so all of those tens of millions of sperm are already in there, and you don't need to use that extra layer, that extra cervical cap. Any other questions that folks have or that you have, Anna?
I know. I love seeing the questions pour in. I think one of my questions to get around some questions is like, what are you do a lot of these talks, you have the virtual community that you founded. What are the three most common questions that you get asked? I feel like you've hit a few of them already, but
Yeah, I think I've hit a few. I often get asked if it makes sense to do two inseminations in a cycle versus one. And this is something we address in the book. Statistically, no. Like if you're just looking purely at the data of people, and there have been some studies done of a single insemination versus multiple inseminations. Doing two inseminations does slightly increase the chance of pregnancy, but it definitely doesn't double it. And especially for those of us who are paying out of pocket for sperm from a bank or coordinating, complex logistics with a known donor, we generally recommend to only do one well-timed insemination. Um, it's never a bad idea to put sperm in your body, and people do all sorts of really creative things. We have a member in the community that's been doing inseminations both with a known donor, so getting the fresh sperm, and with an anonymous donor from a bank, and plans to do a paternity test and figure out who the donor was when they actually conceive. But that's a cool model because the fresh sperm lives for a lot longer in the body, and you don't need to have as precise a window as you do with the previously frozen sperm. But when we look at just how expensive sperm is, and since the pandemic, it has really increased. When I started doing IUIs in 2016, sperm was like $500 or $600 a vial, and now it's like 1500 to 2000 a vial, and that really changes people's access. We have a lot of people using known or directed donors. So we get a lot of questions about that. I will share, and we talk all about this in the book, making sure that you have a known donor contract in place, especially nowadays with the political situation and depending on where you live, like making sure that you are doing what you need to do to protect your family. I would add, before you start your insemination process, along with getting your donor tested for STIs, to also do a sperm analysis. Because something I'm seeing as we are in this moment and dealing with higher levels of infertility and subfertility in the general population, there are more and more donors who have suboptimal sperm counts or sperm motility. And it's really important, I think, to know that information at the beginning, because it will either inform your conception methods or your choice of donor. There are some at-home sperm tests. Fellow does it. It's about $200, and you can mail your donor a kit, and then they send it to a lab and will send you those results. If they can get it done through their primary care provider, that can be a cheaper option. But I do definitely recommend that people do that before they go about that. I will also share, and in early November, we're doing our first queer family building conference called Together. Yeah, Family Equality is an awesome community collaborator on that and sponsoring the conference. And we're going to have a whole legal panel with lawyers from across the country. We have 4 different lawyers who practice in different states, talking about what has changed, what's still the same, how do you protect your family. We're going to have like queer reproductive research reports, a panel of queer perinatal mental health providers, racial justice and queer fertility care. We're going to have a panel with trans and non-binary parents, and just a lot of really wonderful, sweet things. So I recommend, if you're in the middle of this process or thinking about it in any way, to check that out. Thank you for sharing that, Anna.
yeah, all these links, if you're all able to wait 24 hours, I will send an email with like everything that we've talked about and all the links, so you don't have to worry about copying and pasting right now. But that conference does sound amazing, and if you have read the book and liked it, or if you liked this space, that is just like more of that access to information and community, which I think we are in dire need of. We have 15 minutes left, which I would consider to be like last call for questions. So feel free. There's three ways you can ask questions. You can pop it in the chat, you can use the Q&A feature, or you can just raise your hand and we can unmute you. In the meantime, let me see of my little list of questions. Oh, I found that the book had a lot of pro tips, and like never before have I understood the term pro tip more because I'm like, this is a professional tip. I never would have thought to do this thing or to ask this question of the doctor's office. So what are some of your like favorite or most surprising pro tips you've discovered in your work, or even like someone in the Pregnant Together community stumbled upon something? What are some of your fun facts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the yes, one of those things that's exactly a pro tip is has to do with genetic testing. So, especially if you're working with a fertility clinic or if you have a family history of any genetic variances that you want to see if you're a carrier for, um, it is so helpful as much as you can. And most of these genetic screening companies actually like have an option for patients to buy it directly. But it's so helpful if you found your donor through a sperm bank and you want to get tested to see if you're a carrier, figure out which company tested the donor and use that same company to do your own test because you can screen for hundreds and hundreds of different genetic variances and they're all organized in different ways. So if you have the same test as your donor, you don't have to go through the process of looking through. Although now with AI, that would probably make it easier. If you feel comfortable uploading all of that information, they could probably do that for you. But I think that's like a really kind of random pro tip that people don't think too much about. Um, there's a lot to say. I think the little essay that I just read on deciding about IUI versus IVF and thinking about your whole family building picture um, is really helpful and being realistic and looking at, we have some data like I will preface this by saying I've had clients who are 43 and get pregnant on their first IUI. And I've had clients who are 25 and take 10 months to get pregnant. But statistically, generally, our fertility does decline with age. And so, that person who's actually a midwife friend of mine who lives in Oakland at 36 doing that math, it was like, oh, this is what probably makes the most sense given the situation. So I think not being afraid to really like look at the numbers, think about your ideal, and then also know that we make plans and God laughs and things change, but making that best decision as much as we can. Also get a couples therapist. If you are partnered and going through this, like it just brings up it completely becoming a parent completely changes your relationship. Um, being able to flow with the changes and I think just having that mindset that things are going to change when you become a parent. For a lot of people, especially those of us who are in AFAB, assigned female at birth relationships or queer lesbian relationships, however you call it, pregnancy and trying to conceive can be the first time that we experience biological difference in our relationship. Like we're used to having periods and menstruating and sharing that with a partner. It can be the first time where like hormones really are different. The attention you get from people really is different. And so knowing that that is normal, that it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's wrong, and having people to support you through it is really, really important. Somebody shared that they have two genetic mutations. I know it isn't guaranteed that my children will also have them, but would you recommend going the IVF route? That's a good question, and I am not a genetic counselor. And depending on if you're working with a fertility clinic, there are genetic counselors. We actually just did a webinar on genetic counseling for queer folks and solo parents, which may be good to check out. But I would say, and probably what a counselor would say, is it depends on the severity of the genetic mutation, what that would mean if your child had it, how much that would impact quality of life. Probably just screening a donor who doesn't have that would be sufficient. But there are people that I've worked with that have a genetic mutation that is serious enough that they do not want to pass it on, and therefore they do IVF so that they can test the embryos and find embryos that do not have that same genetic mutation. So the short answer is it really depends on the severity and your what your experience would be and what the child's experience would be with growing up with that condition. Oh, we had another question. So during the 2 week wait, and then during the first trimester, what kinds of body movements or exercise should be avoided? I've heard different things about yoga, for example. What about core strength exercises, bending, twisting, etc.? Great question. So really, the only thing that should really be avoided as far as exercise and movements during that time is heating your internal temperature a lot. So getting into a hot tub, being in a sauna for a long time, heat has been shown to really impact fetal growth. So we don't want to do any hot baths during that time. But truthfully, you can do any movements or exercises that feel good in your body. The general recommendation, if you did a medication assisted cycle where like they give you medications that increase your ovary size, um, they recommend waiting about 2 weeks to do like really intense weight training. Although the risk of ovarian torsion when your ovary twists is it's pretty low, but better safe than sorry. But we say in the book, this is not a time to take on CrossFit if you've never done it before. But if you've been doing CrossFit for 3 times a week for years and your body's used to it, you can continue to do all of those things. Um, just listen to yourself, and you may feel tired and nauseous and not want to do it. But really, what the research shows is just don't get overheated. We probably have time for one more question. I will also, I'm going to just put my email in the chat if you have any questions about anything we talked about, or more questions about the community, or wanting resources, I can point you in that direction.
And while we wait for folks to get their last question in, a few plugs. The book, Baby Making for Everybody, if you haven't read it yet, you can get it. Head to your local bookstore and get shopping. It really is like the book. Like I've been working for Family Equality for 5 years. I'm like, wow, this is everything that you need to know. So head over to your local bookstore. Try not to shop Amazon if possible, and find a way to get it. Also, Pregnant Together, community.pregnanttogether.com. That's the virtual community we've been talking about. I'll send the link out to you all in the follow-up email 24 hours from now. The virtual conference, same deal. I'll send our $5 off registration link to you all. And then you can view other events like this one at familyequality.org/events. we have a fertility and trying to conceive peer support space that I actually think you've stopped in on at least
I
once.
have. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of overlap. Like there are people that
right?
go there and are part of the
Yes,
Pregnant
beats
Together community.
tomorrow. Rebecca's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, one more. There is another question in here. So go for it.
Yeah. We had a question besides AMH, are there other factors to consider candidacy for IVF, or is IVF pretty much it? Or is AMH pretty much it? Um, so AMH is a blood test that we do that evaluates your ovarian reserve. Um, that and an ovarian ultrasound is usually what fertility providers use to kind of assess candidacy for IVF. And I will say that I know a lot of people who get their AMH back and it's really low, and their fertility doctor doesn't recommend doing IVF, but doing IUI, and they have success with IUI. It depends on a lot of things on your age and your overall fertility picture. But yeah, we don't really have a ton of other tests that are very indicative of IVF success. I will say, and I'm seeing more people, who in their early or mid 40s who have tried IVF and haven't been able to get pregnant are considering embryo adoption or donor eggs. And I think that's a conversation that's becoming more common everywhere, not just in the queer and solo parent community, but also with heterosexual folks who are experiencing infertility. And Co-Fertility is a cool organization that has a lower cost egg sharing model. So they basically will pay for they screen their donors, and they'll pay for someone's IVF cycle if they agree to donate half of their eggs to someone else. Yeah, it's an interesting model. So yeah, exploring your resources with that, but that's pretty much all we have right now as far as evaluating. We will at the conference. So there's a free pass, a premium pass, and a professional pass that includes continuing education. There are 3 sessions that will be available with the free pass, and one of them is sponsored by Spring Fertility, and it's a couple of their very queer-friendly providers, and they will talk in more in detail about growing your family in a fertility clinic setting and the different testing options that are there. So that may be a good resource. It's on November 4th.
All right. I think that takes us right up to the top of the hour. But I popped Maria's email into the chat
Yeah.
again so that everyone can see it. And all the links will go out to you tomorrow. Maria, is there anything else that you want to share or promote or anything that would be helpful?
No, it was wonderful to be here. I feel really strongly about people having access to this information. So if the community is $20 a month, if that is outside of your budget, just message me and I'll share a link with you if you want to come to the conference but can't afford it. Send me an email. It's me doing all of this. I just like really believe that we should all have access to all of this information, and there are already so many barriers that we face. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah. And I just want to use that opportunity to say thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for making sure that this information is accessible. It's already a whirlwind for so many people, the process of becoming a parent as a queer person or a solo parent. To have one person in the world making it easier makes all the difference. So thank you so
Thanks.
much on behalf of all the families that we serve. You're doing really important work, and we so
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I feel the same way about you guys.
We are a tag team for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we're ready to close out. But thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Maria, for joining us tonight. This will be, I think it's recorded, so it'll be sent out. And keep an eye on your inboxes for those resources. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.